Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into the world of cults today.
Ooh,
Yeah,
cults.
we're working with this Q&A
Okay.
with cult expert Rick Allen Ross.
I've heard of him.
You know, the guy who's like dedicated his life to understanding these groups and helping people get out.
Right.
And we thought with all the news lately about like everything feeling kind of culty,
Yeah.
it's time to equip ourselves with like the knowledge to spot the warning signs and like more importantly, understand why people get drawn in.
Yeah, for sure. I think it really is about, understanding the psychology behind it all.
Totally.
It's easy to, dismiss people who join cults as, naive or vulnerable.
Uh-huh.
But it's way more complex than that.
Totally. So how can we even begin to like wrap our heads around what makes a cult a cult?
Right.
Is it just any group with a charismatic leader and a bunch of devoted followers?
Yeah.
Thankfully, Rick Allen Ross breaks it down for us.
He does. He points to three core characteristics that distinguish a destructive cult from, say, a harmless fan club. The first being the presence of an absolute totalitarian leader.
Yeah.
So this is someone whose word is law.
Oh, wow.
No questions asked, and followers see them as almost godlike, placing complete trust, even worship in them.
It's giving Major Drink the Kool-Aid vibes.
Yeah.
So what's the second characteristic?
The second is the use of coercive persuasion to gain undue influence.
Well,
And this is where things get really interesting because it delves into the psychology of manipulation. So we're talking about techniques like love bombing, where new recruits are showered with attention and affection,
okay.
making them feel instantly accepted and special. Or the flip side,
Yeah.
guilt trips and threats to keep followers in line.
It's wild how cults manage to turn basic human needs for belonging and security against us.
Exactly. And that leads us to the third characteristic.
Okay.
Exploitation and harm. So once that control is established, it's often used to exploit followers.
Right.
This could be financial. Think of those groups where members have to hand over their life savings. But it can also be emotional, psychological, or even physical abuse.
Okay, so that all makes sense. But couldn't you argue that some super intense fandoms, like those surrounding certain tech companies or pop stars,
Yeah.
also exhibit some of those traits? I mean, have you seen some of those Twitter threads?
You raise a valid point. There can definitely be blurry lines.
Right.
The key difference, as Rick Allen Ross points out, is the level of harm inflicted.
Yeah.
A true destructive cult actively seeks to control and exploit its members, often with devastating consequences.
So take North Korea, for example.
Yeah.
It's basically a cult on a national scale.
Yeah.
Right? You've got a leader who's worshipped total isolation from the outside world
Right.
and reports of horrific human rights abuses.
Mm.
It's a chilling example of just how far this kind of unchecked power can go.
It is, and it really highlights the dangers of absolute obedience and the suppression of critical thinking.
Speaking of blurry lines, this next one is something I know a lot of people wonder about. Where do we draw the line between a cult and a religion?
Yeah.
I mean, history is full of religious movements that started out as fringe groups, right?
That's right, and it's something that Rick Allen Ross addresses directly. He acknowledges that the line can be fuzzy, even suggesting that some established religions might have originated as cults.
Right, like if you look at groups like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses,
Uh-huh.
they have some practices or beliefs that might raise eyebrows from an outsider's perspective.
They do, but the key distinction lies in how religions evolve over time.
Okay.
Think about it. Established religions tend to develop systems of checks and balances, allowing for more democratic governance,
Right.
transparency, and accountability.
And most importantly, they don't make you feel like you're betraying God just because you decide to leave.
Exactly. It's about freedom of choice and conscience. In a healthy religious community, you have the right to question,
Yeah.
to disagree, even to walk away without fear of eternal damnation or social ostracism.
Okay, here's a question I've always been curious about. Do cult leaders actually know they're running a cult? Like, are they self-aware masterminds? Or do they genuinely believe they're doing good?
It's a fascinating question, and it gets to the heart of the psychology of these leaders.
Yeah.
So according to Rick Allen Ross, they most likely know on some level that they're using manipulation, but they've rationalized it to an extreme.
So they convince themselves that the ends justify the means, even if the means are pretty messed up.
Precisely. They often have a messiah complex, truly believing that they hold the key to salvation or enlightenment,
Right.
and that anything they do to achieve their goals is ultimately for the greater good. And because they have such a powerful hold over their followers, they rarely face any real consequences for their actions.
Yeah, it's terrifying. You'd think that in this day and age, with all the information available at our fingertips, people would be able to see through these tactics.
You'd think so, right? But here's the catch.
What's that?
Cults have gone digital.
What?
It's not just about isolated compounds anymore.
Oh, you mean like that whole TikTok cult thing I read about?
Yeah.
Where they were allegedly exploiting dancers for profit and had everyone living together wild.
It's wild.
It's like the internet is this breeding ground for all kinds of fringe groups and ideologies.
It is, and it makes the whole concept of isolation and control even more complex.
Yeah.
They don't need to physically confine people anymore when they can create echo chambers online, carefully curating the information their followers consume.
Which brings us to another common tactic, doomsday prophecies. Why is the end of the world such a recurring theme in cults? Is it just to scare people into submission?
It's more nuanced than that, actually. As Rick Alan Ross explains, doomsday prophecies create a sense of urgency and dependence.
Okay.
When people believe the world is about to end, they're more likely to cling to the cult for safety and security.
So it's less about a genuine belief in the apocalypse and more about using fear as a tool of manipulation.
Exactly. It creates a powerful us versus them mentality where the cult is the only path to salvation.
Right.
And sadly, we've seen how this can lead to tragedy. The Waco Davidians, led by David Koresh, are a stark example of how these prophecies can have devastating consequences.
Oh, yeah.
He convinced his followers that the apocalypse was imminent and that only those within his compound would be saved.
Wow.
They stockpiled weapons, prepared for a siege, and ultimately the compound went up in flames, killing everyone inside.
That's just heartbreaking. It's a stark reminder of how powerful a leader's influence can be, especially when they tap into people's primal fears.
It also highlights how the need for belonging can lead people to make irrational and even dangerous decisions.
Another thing I've always wondered about is the connection between cults and sex. It seems like a lot of these groups have some pretty unusual beliefs and practices when it comes to intimacy.
That's right. And it's not about sex itself,
Okay.
but about power and control.
So it's a tool for domination.
Exactly. Cult leaders often use sex to manipulate and control their followers. Think of figures like Charlie Manson or David Koresh.
Right.
They use sex to solidify their power, coerce women, and create a culture of fear and obedience.
Okay, so sometimes it's about promoting promiscuity and using sex as a way to control people.
Yeah.
But then you have groups like Heaven's Gate where they enforced celibacy and even encouraged castration. What's up with that?
That's a great example of how the specific form of control can vary, but the underlying principle is the same.
Okay.
The leader gets to dictate the most intimate aspects of their followers' lives.
Right.
It's all about stripping individuals of their autonomy and making them completely dependent on the leader's whims.
So we've talked about these large-scale, headline-grabbing cults, but Rick Alan Ross also mentions these family cults, which sounds even more insidious to me.
Oh, absolutely. These are typically dominated by a controlling, often patriarchal figure who rules every aspect of family life with an iron fist.
So it's like the children are never allowed to grow up or have their own lives.
Exactly. Imagine having your relationships dictated, your finances controlled, and never truly being allowed to mature or become independent. It's a terrifying thought, this idea of being imprisoned within your own family.
And it highlights another important point. Doesn't it? A cult doesn't need a huge compound or hundreds of followers. It can thrive with just one person under the thumb of another.
You're absolutely right. Think about abusive relationships like the one between Ike and Tina Turner.
Right?
Tina was isolated from her support system, subject to Ike's constant control and manipulation. It's a chilling reminder that cults can exist in the most unexpected places, even within the supposed sanctity of a family or a romantic relationship.
Okay, so we've laid out a pretty bleak picture here. What happens when someone realizes they're in a cult? Or when their loved ones are trapped? Is there anything that can be done?
There is, but it's crucial to approach it carefully. Rick Alan Ross stresses the importance of avoiding confrontation and accusations.
Okay.
Telling someone outright that they're in a cult is likely to make them defensive and less receptive to help.
So it's all about keeping the lines of communication open, showing them that you care, and hoping they eventually come to see the truth for themselves.
Exactly. Now, professional intervention can be very effective, but it needs to be done strategically.
How so?
Think less movie-style kidnapping and more creating a safe space for critical thinking.
How does that work exactly?
It often involves a team, including family friends and a trained interventionist. They'll usually try to get the person away from the cult's influence.
Okay.
Even if it's just for a few days, no phones, no internet, no contact with other members, then the interventionist guides structured conversations, helping the individual understand what a destructive cult actually is, how coercive persuasion works, and how they've been specifically targeted.
So you're basically trying to break down the cult's hold on their mind and expose the truth about the group's history, finances, any shady stuff they've been trying to keep secret.
Exactly. The goal is to empower them to make their own informed decisions, not to force them to renounce their beliefs. And you know what? This approach actually works.
Oh, really?
Rick Allen Ross reports about a 70% success rate with people either leaving the group entirely or at the very least taking a break to reevaluate things.
Wow, that's actually really encouraging. It shows that even when people are deeply entrenched in a cult, there's still hope for them to break free.
There absolutely is. But it's important to remember that recovery is a process, and it takes time, patience, and support.
Okay, so we've laid out a lot of theory here. I think it would be helpful to dive into some real-world examples, some high-profile cases that illustrate everything we've been talking about. I know this can get a bit heavy, but I think it's important to see the very real impact cults can have on people's lives.
I agree. Looking at specific cases can really bring the issue to life and help us understand the different forms cults can take.
So first up, let's talk about Scientology. It's been around for decades, has tons of celebrity followers, and has been the subject of countless documentaries and exposés. What makes them so fascinating and also so concerning from a cult perspective?
Well, Scientology is a prime example of how a group can effectively blend elements of religion, self-help, and science fiction to create a compelling and ultimately extremely controlling belief system.
Right, and they've been incredibly successful at recruiting celebrities, which gives them this veneer of legitimacy and glamour. It can be very alluring.
Exactly, and they've been notoriously aggressive in protecting their image and silencing critics,
Yeah.
which makes it even harder for people to speak out against them.
Then we have NXIVM, which started out as this self-improvement organization, but was later revealed to be a horrifying sex cult.
Yeah, the NXIVM case is particularly disturbing because it shows how easily a seemingly harmless self-help group can be used to manipulate and exploit vulnerable individuals.
Right.
The fact that they branded their victims is just beyond chilling.
It is, and it speaks to the level of dehumanization and control that cults can exert over their members.
Okay.
Next, we have Bikram Yoga.
Okay.
This one is interesting because it shows that cults can exist even within the seemingly innocuous settings like fitness studios.
Right. Bikram Choudhury was a charismatic figure who built a devoted following around his unique style of hot yoga, but as his popularity grew, so did his ego and his sense of entitlement. And he was eventually accused of sexual assault and exploitation by multiple women. It's a classic example of how a cult of personality can form around a powerful and influential leader, even when there are no explicitly religious or spiritual beliefs involved.
It's a reminder that cults can pop up anywhere, and
Right.
anyone can be susceptible to their tactics.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of being discerning about the leaders we choose to follow and organizations we choose to support.
Now let's talk about the Twin Flames universe, which is a more recent example, but no less disturbing.
This group preys on people's deep longing for love and connection, convincing them that they have a predestined soulmate, their twin flame, waiting for them. But it's a manipulative scheme designed to control and exploit its followers.
And they've encouraged people to make drastic life changes, like cutting ties with their families, even undergoing sex reassignment surgery, all in pursuit of this elusive twin flame.
It's heartbreaking to see how they twist people's most fundamental desires for love and belonging into tools for manipulation.
Then there are the Moonies, officially known as the Unification Church, which has been around for decades and has a long and controversial history.
The Moonies are fascinating because they've been very successful in building a global organization with a lot of financial and political influence. They're also known for their mass weddings, where thousands of couples are married, often without ever having met before. It's a practice that has been widely criticized as coercive and exploitative,
Right.
but they defend it as a way to create a pure and unified society.
It's certainly a unique approach to matchmaking, to say the least.
It is, and it raises questions about the boundaries between free will and indoctrination within a group context.
And finally, we have Mother God, also known as Amy Carlson, who led a group that believed she was the literal reincarnation of God.
Carlson's case is a tragic example of how the internet can be used to spread harmful ideologies and recruit vulnerable individuals. She was able to amass a significant following through social media and other online platforms, convincing people to give up their lives and possessions to join her group.
It's a stark reminder that cults are not a relic of the past, but a very real and present danger in the digital age.
Absolutely, and it underscores the importance of critical thinking and discernment, especially when encountering information online.
Okay, that was a lot to process. It's clear that cults are a serious issue, And understanding their tactics is vital to protect ourselves and our loved ones. But before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I have to ask, with all this information out there, how is it possible that people are still falling for these schemes in 2024? I mean, come on, haven't we learned anything?
It's a valid question. It can be easy to look at these situations and wonder, how could anyone be so gullible?
Right.
But remember, cults are masters of manipulation. They prey on our deepest desires for belonging, purpose, and meaning, offering seemingly easy answers to life's complex questions.
So it's not necessarily about being naive, but about being expertly targeted and manipulated.
Exactly. They offer a sense of community, a promise of personal growth,
Mhm.
even a path to financial freedom. It's incredibly seductive, especially when someone is feeling lost, lonely, or disillusioned.
It's like they're offering a quick fix, a shortcut to happiness.
Yeah,
And for people who are struggling, that can be really appealing.
absolutely. And we have to remember that anyone can be susceptible regardless of their intelligence or education level.
Right.
Rick Allen Ross has even deprogrammed highly educated professionals, medical doctors included.
Wow.
It shows that cult recruitment is a sophisticated process that can target anyone regardless of their background.
So the takeaway here is that we can't afford to be complacent. We all need to be aware of the dangers, educate ourselves about the tactics, and be willing to speak up if we see something that seems off.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, and in the fight against cult influence, the more we know, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and those we care about.
Well said. And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back with part 2 of our deep dive into the world of cults.
You know, it's interesting how we often talk about cults as if there's something out there, something that happens to other people. But the reality is that these manipulative tactics are all around us, even in seemingly normal settings.
Well, hold on. Are you saying like we're all potentially one bad day away from joining a cult? That's a bit intense, don't you think?
Maybe not a full-blown cult,
Okay.
but the underlying principles of influence and persuasion are definitely at play in many areas of our lives.
Like where?
Think about marketing, advertising, even politics. These fields often use similar techniques to sway our opinions and behaviors.
Okay, I see what you mean, like those ads that promise you'll be happier and more successful if you just buy their product,
Right.
or those political campaigns that play on people's fears and anxieties to get their vote.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the patterns of manipulation regardless of the context and being aware of our own vulnerabilities.
Right.
Those deep-seated desires for belonging, validation, and meaning that can be exploited.
So it's less about being gullible and more about being human with all our hopes and fears.
Precisely, and that's why it's so important to cultivate critical thinking skills, to question the information we're presented with, and to be wary of anyone who promises easy answers or quick fixes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But let's shift gears a bit and get back to the topic of helping people who are already entangled in cults.
Yeah,
We talked about professional intervention, but how does that actually work in practice?
right.
Is it like what we see in the movies where a team of experts swoops in and whisks the person away to a secret location?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. It often involves a team of people, including family members, friends, and a trained interventionist.
Okay.
The element of surprise can be crucial, as you said, to prevent the cult from interfering.
Right.
But the goal isn't to kidnap or coerce the person.
Right.
It's about creating a safe and controlled environment where they can start to think critically about their situation.
So you're basically trying to break through the mental fog
Yeah.
created by the cult's indoctrination.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it like gently untangling a knot.
Okay.
The interventionist guides structured conversations, helping the individual understand the nature of cults, the techniques of coercive persuasion they've been subjected to, and the specific ways they've been manipulated.
So you're giving them back the tools to think for themselves, to see the situation from a different perspective.
Precisely. And a key part of that is presenting them with information the cult has been hiding.
Like what?
Things like their real history financial dealings, any lawsuits or scandals. It's about exposing the cracks in the facade, helping them see the organization for what it truly is.
It sounds like a delicate process. How successful are these interventions?
Remarkably so, actually. Rick Allen Ross says about 70% of the people he works with choose to either leave the group entirely or at least take a break to reassess things.
Wow.
It's a testament to the power of critical thinking and the resilience of the human spirit.
That is encouraging.
Hmm.
It shows there is hope, even when someone seems deeply lost in a cult script.
Absolutely, but it's crucial to remember that recovery is a process, and it takes time, patience, and support. There's no magic bullet, and every individual's journey is unique.
Okay, so let's wrap up this part of our deep dive by revisiting some of the cases we discussed earlier. I know it can be heavy, but I think it's important to illustrate the real-world impact of cults. And maybe by understanding their tactics, we can be better equipped to protect ourselves and others.
I completely agree. Real-world examples can be far more powerful than abstract concepts. They help us connect with the human stories behind the headlines and understand the very real dangers these groups pose.
So let's start with Scientology. It's been around for so long. It has this massive global presence and even boasts some A-list celebrities among its followers. What makes them so fascinating and also so concerning from a cult perspective?
Well, Scientology is a textbook example of how a group can successfully blend elements of religion, self-help, and science fiction to create this incredibly compelling and ultimately very controlling belief system.
Right.
They have their own language, their own rituals, their own version of history, and they demand absolute loyalty and obedience from their members.
It's like they've created their own little universe with its own set of rules and realities. And the fact that they've been able to attract high-profile celebrities certainly adds to their allure and makes it easier for them to recruit new followers.
Exactly. And let's not forget their reputation for aggressively silencing critics and using intimidation tactics to maintain control. It creates a culture of fear where people are afraid to speak out or question the leadership.
And then we have NXIVM, which was exposed as a front for a horrific sex cult.
Yeah, the NXIVM case is particularly disturbing because it shows how a seemingly legitimate self-help organization can be used to prey on people's vulnerabilities and manipulate them into doing things they would never have imagined. The branding ritual they used on their female members is a particularly chilling example of their cruelty and control.
It's a reminder that cults don't always fit the stereotypical image we might have in our minds.
Right.
They can operate in plain sight, using sophisticated tactics to recruit and control their members.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the warning signs, to question authority, and to trust our gut instincts when something feels off.
Okay, next up is Bikram yoga. This one is interesting because it shows that cults can exist even in seemingly innocuous settings like fitness studios.
Right. Bikram Chaudhuri was a charismatic figure who built a huge following around his unique style of hot yoga. But as his fame grew, so did his ego and his sense of entitlement.
Wow.
He created a culture of fear and intimidation, demanding absolute obedience from his students and staff. And tragically, he was eventually accused of sexual assault and exploitation by multiple women.
It's a classic example of how a cult of personality can develop around a powerful and influential leader, even when there aren't any explicitly religious or spiritual beliefs involved.
It's a sobering reminder that abuse of power can happen anywhere, and it's crucial to be discerning about the leaders we choose to follow and the organizations we choose to support.
Now, the Twin Flames universe is a more recent example, but it's no less disturbing.
This group preys on people's longing for love and connection, convincing them that they have a predestined soulmate, their twin flame waiting for them. But it's all a manipulative scheme designed to extract money and control their followers' lives.
And they've encouraged people to do some pretty drastic things, like cutting ties with their families and undergoing sex reassignment surgery, all in pursuit of this elusive twin flame.
It's heartbreaking to see how they twist people's genuine desires for love and belonging into tools for manipulation and exploitation.
Then there are the Moonies, officially known as the Unification Church, which has been around for decades and has a long and controversial history.
The Moonies are fascinating because they've been so successful in building a global organization with significant financial and political clout. They're also known for their mass weddings, where thousands of couples are married, often without ever having met before. It's a practice that has raised a lot of eyebrows and concerns about coercion and exploitation.
I remember seeing pictures of those mass weddings as both fascinating and unsettling at the same time.
It is, and it raises questions about the boundaries between free will and indoctrination within a group context.
And finally, we have Mother God, another tragic example of a cult leader who amassed a fortune and a devoted following through a combination of charisma, manipulation, and exploitation.
Amy Carlson, also known as Mother God, was a charismatic figure who claimed to be the reincarnation of God. She created a group that revolved around her personality and teachings, demanding absolute loyalty and obedience from her followers.
And she was able to build a significant following online using social media and other platforms to spread her message and recruit new members.
Exactly. Her case highlights the dangers of online cults as they can easily reach a wider audience and exploit the anonymity and accessibility of the digital world.
It's a reminder that cults are not just a relic of the past, but a very real and present danger in the digital age.
Absolutely. and it underscores the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and healthy skepticism, especially when navigating the vast and often unfiltered landscape of the internet.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this episode, exploring the chilling world of cults, their manipulative tactics, and the devastating impact they can have on people's lives. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to a question that's been lingering in my mind.
Okay.
If cults can thrive in this day and age with all the information at our fingertips, what does that say about us as a society? Are we really that vulnerable to manipulation?
That's a profound question, and it speaks to a larger societal issue, perhaps in our relentless pursuit of belonging, meaning, and certainty. We've become more susceptible to those who offer easy answers and quick fixes, even if those promises come at a high cost.
So it's not about being naive or gullible, but about recognizing that we all have vulnerabilities that can be exploited.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we need to be more discerning, more critical in our thinking, and more willing to question those who claim to have all the answers.
Okay, so what can we do to protect ourselves and our loved ones from falling prey to these tactics? Is there a magic formula for spotting a cult a mile away?
There's no foolproof formula, but there are definitely red flags to watch out for. One of the most important things is to pay attention to changes in behavior.
Ah,
If someone you care about becomes increasingly isolated, secretive, or starts using unusual language or jargon, it could be a sign that they're being influenced by a group with harmful intentions.
so it's about trusting our instincts and not dismissing those subtle shifts in personality or behavior.
Exactly. And it's crucial to have open and honest conversations with our loved ones about the dangers of cults and manipulative groups.
Okay, so let's say you've noticed some red flags in someone you care about. What are the first steps you should take?
The most important thing is to stay calm and avoid confrontation. Remember, the goal is to bring your loved one back, not to push them further away.
So no dramatic interventions or angry accusations?
Right. Approach the situation with empathy and understanding, let them know you care and that you're concerned about their well-being.
And what about seeking professional help? Is that something you would recommend?
Absolutely. If you're concerned about someone's involvement in a potentially harmful group, consulting with a qualified mental health professional who specializes in cult recovery is a crucial step. They can provide guidance and support for both the individual and their loved ones.
And there are also organizations like the one run by Rick Alan Ross, which offer valuable resources and support for families and former cult members.
Exactly. Reaching out to these organizations can provide you with the information, guidance, and community support you need to navigate this challenging situation.
So the key takeaway here is that we don't have to face this alone. There are people and resources available to help us understand, prevent, and even recover from the harmful influence of cults.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power. And by educating ourselves and our loved ones about the tactics and dangers of cults, we can empower ourselves to make informed decisions and protect ourselves from their harmful influence.
That question really has me thinking, are we all just walking around ripe for the picking by some charismatic leader with a good pitch?
It's a valid concern, and it highlights the importance of understanding the psychology of persuasion and influence.
Okay, so maybe this whole deep dive is less about cults and more about how we form beliefs and communities in a world where, like, information overload is the norm.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about understanding the underlying human needs and desires
Yeah.
that make us susceptible to these kinds of influences. We all crave connection, purpose, and a sense of belonging, and in a world that can feel increasingly fragmented and chaotic,
Right?
it's easy to see how someone might be drawn to a group that offers simple answers and a clear sense of identity.
But that's the danger, isn't it? Those simple answers are often misleading, and that sense of identity can come at the cost of individual freedom and critical thinking.
Exactly.
It's like trading your own unique perspective for the comfort of conformity.
Precisely, and that's where critical thinking comes in. It's
What?
about developing the ability to question the information we're presented with, to evaluate different perspectives, and to make our own informed decisions. It's about recognizing those red flags, those subtle signs that a group might be more interested in control than in genuine personal growth.
So how do we cultivate that kind of critical thinking in ourselves and in others, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information from all sides?
Well, it starts with recognizing that we're all susceptible to manipulation to some degree. None of us are immune to those deep-seated desires for belonging and certainty.
So admitting that we don't have all the answers is actually the first step towards wisdom.
Exactly. Once we acknowledge our own vulnerabilities, we can start to build those critical thinking muscles.
Okay.
We can ask questions, challenge assumptions, and seek out diverse perspectives.
Hmm.
And we can model that behavior for others, creating a culture of healthy skepticism and open dialogue.
Okay, so let's say we've done our homework, we're aware of the red flags, and we're committed to critical thinking. What are some practical steps we can take to protect ourselves and our loved ones from falling prey to manipulative groups?
Well, one of the most important things is to be mindful of the information we consume and the sources we trust.
Yeah.
It's easy to get swept up in sensationalized headlines or echo chambers online where everyone seems to agree with each other.
So it's about being more discerning about what we read, watch, and listen to.
Exactly. And it's about actively seeking out diverse perspectives, even those that might challenge our own beliefs.
Right.
It's about engaging in respectful debate and being willing to consider different points of view.
And what about red flags in our personal relationships? How do we spot those subtle signs that someone we care about might be getting pulled into a harmful group?
Well, as we discussed earlier, pay attention to any sudden and drastic changes in behavior. If someone becomes increasingly isolated from their friends and family, secretive about their activities, or starts using language that seems out of character,
Yeah.
it could be a warning sign.
So trust your gut instinct. If something feels off,
Hmm.
don't dismiss those subtle shifts in personality or behavior
Mm.
as just a phase.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to have open and honest conversations with your loved ones about your concerns.
Mhm.
Express your love and support, but also be clear about the red flags you've noticed and the potential dangers of the group they might be involved with.
And if the situation seems serious, don't hesitate to seek professional help.
Absolutely. If you're concerned about someone's involvement in a potentially harmful group, consulting with a qualified mental health professional who specializes in cult recovery is a crucial step that can provide guidance and support for both the individual and their loved ones.
And there are also organizations like the one run by Rick Allen Ross that offer resources and support for families and former cult members.
Exactly. Reaching out to these organizations can provide you with the information, guidance, and community support you need to navigate this challenging situation.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the psychology of manipulation to the real-world impact of cults. It's been a heavy topic, but I think it's one that deserves our attention.
I agree. And by understanding the tactics and dangers of cults, we can empower ourselves to make informed decisions and protect ourselves and our loved ones from their harmful influence.
So as we wrap up this episode, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important message is that while cults can be a terrifying and destructive force, knowledge is our best defense. By educating ourselves about the tactics they use and being aware of the warning signs, we can build resilience, protect ourselves, and create a world where these harmful groups have less power to exploit and control.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cults. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and empowering. Remember, the deep dive doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep thinking for yourselves. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.